I stood alone at the front of the chapel. Not quietly alone, not peacefully alone, but noticeably alone. 5 rows of wooden benches stretched behind me, empty, polished, accusing. The kind of empty that echoes when you breathe too loud. The kind that makes strangers avoid your eyes. The wind cut through the open courtyard doors, sharp and impatient, rattling the hymn books like it was offended by the silence. Even the weather didn't want to stay. The funeral director shifted his weight near the aisle. He glanced at his watch, then at me, then back at the empty seats again, like maybe, just maybe, someone would appear if he looked hard enough. "Mrs. Holloway?" he said gently, lowering his voice as if grief had volume settings. "Would you like us to wait a few more minutes?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "Start." Because George hated waiting. He hated being late. Hated missed appointments. Hated unfinished things. Even when he was dying, he took his pills on the dot, news at 6, lights out by 10, slippers placed side by side like soldiers at rest. And now here he was, on time for his own funeral, and utterly alone. I sat in the front row, 5 empty chairs beside me, 1 for our son, 1 for our daughter, 3 for grandchildren who were apparently too busy living their lives to say goodbye to the man who helped create them. The pastor cleared his throat and began reading from the scripture, his voice practiced but distant, like he was reading for the room, not the man. The flowers were too bright, the casket too polished, everything looked wrong. George would have rolled his eyes at the display. "All this fuss," he would have whispered, "and nobody even bothered to show up?" I clenched my hands together. That morning, my phone had buzzed. Not rang, buzzed. A message from our son. Just one line. "Sorry, Mom, something came up. Can't make it." No call, no explanation, no apology that meant anything. I imagined him glancing at his phone between meetings, or worse, between cocktails, deciding this was one inconvenience he could postpone. Our daughter, Melissa, didn't even text. She'd left a voicemail 2 days earlier, cheerful and rushed. "Mom, I really can't cancel my nail appointment. You know how anxious rescheduling makes me. Tell Dad I'll visit next week." Next week, as if dead men waited. The service ended quickly. There were no hugs afterwards, no murmured condolences, no shared memories. Just the sound of footsteps that weren't there. I followed the pallbearers alone. Didn't cry. Not because my heart wasn't breaking, but because there's a kind of grief so heavy it doesn't move. It just sits inside you, pressing down, daring you to breathe. At the cemetery, the ground was already waiting. A single groundskeeper stood nearby, cap in his hands, pretending not to watch. The coffin lowered. The earth fell. And just like that, George was gone. I stayed after everyone else left, which didn't take long. The wind tugged at my coat. My heels sank slightly into the dirt. The temporary plaque caught the light. George Holloway, beloved husband, father. Father. The word felt unfinished. At home, the silence screamed. His recliner untouched. His slippers still aligned. The remote exactly where he left it. I poured myself a glass of wine, the expensive one we saved for guests, and opened my phone. I don't know why I looked, but I did. Melissa's Instagram was public. Posted 2 hours ago. Her and her friends. Drinks raised, smiling wide. Girls' brunch. Bottomless mimosas. Living our best lives. Daniel's post followed. A golf course. Bright sun. New clubs. Killer swing. Perfect weather. I set the phone down, and in that moment, standing in the kitchen of a man I buried alone, I realized something had shifted. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. Something clearer. And that night, sitting at the table where George used to peel apples for me, always giving me the best slice, I made a decision. Quietly. With dignity. The same way George lived. Because if I was the only one who showed up for his goodbye, then I would be the only one deciding what came next. Tomorrow morning, I was going to open a folder my children didn't even know existed. And once I did, there would be no undoing it. The house felt heavier that night. Not darker, just denser. Like the walls had absorbed everything I hadn't said over the years, and were finally pushing it back toward me. I sat at the kitchen table long after the wine glass was empty, staring at nothing in particular. The clock ticked loudly, unapologetic. George had fixed it 3 times over the years, refusing to replace it because it still works. That should count for something. I wondered if he ever felt the same way about us. I stood up slowly and walked down the hallway toward our bedroom. His side of the bed was still perfectly made. He'd always pulled the blanket tight, smoothing the wrinkles with the flat of his hand like it mattered. I hadn't slept there since he passed. Instead, I'd taken the guest room, telling myself it was temporary, knowing it wasn't. George's desk sat against the wall, untouched. Top drawer, still locked. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small brass key, the same one I'd carried on my keychain for years without thinking about it. I unlocked the drawer. Everything was exactly as he left it. Envelopes sorted by size, spare keys taped to labeled cards, an old stamp book he hadn't opened in decades. And behind it all, tucked carefully where no one would look unless they knew, was the folder. Thin, neat, bound with a rubber band. Labeled in George's handwriting, Estate. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened it. Inside were copies of our wills reviewed and finalized 2 years earlier. George had insisted we do it then. You don't plan these things when it's urgent. You plan them when your head is clear. My head had never been clearer than it was now. Daniel's name appeared first. Co-beneficiary of the main investment account. Nearly $300,000. Money we'd saved by skipping vacations, driving old cars, and fixing things ourselves instead of replacing them. Melissa's name followed. Joint transfer of the house. Equal share of the lake cabin. Equal access. Equal inheritance. Equal. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny, but because it suddenly felt absurd. I flipped through the pages slowly. The cabin. The one they never visited anymore. The one they always asked about when tax season came around. Are we still keeping it? Is it appreciating? Do you think it's worth more now? Never, how's it holding up? Never, do you still go there? Never, do you miss Dad there? My hands began to shake. Not from age, from something sharper. Betrayal doesn't explode, it pulses, quietly, steadily, like a second heartbeat you didn't ask for. I stood and walked to the closet, pulling out the old canvas bin stored on the top shelf. Photographs. Years of them. Birthdays, holidays, beach trips, backyard barbecues. George holding Daniel on his shoulders, Melissa clinging to my leg, laughing. Christmas mornings with wrapping paper everywhere and George pretending not to cry. We were a family. Once. I picked up a photo of George and Daniel fishing. Daniel couldn't have been more than 12. George had his arm around him, pointing at the water, his face full of quiet pride. That man deserved more than an empty chapel. I placed the photo back gently. Then I picked up my phone. It was nearly midnight. I didn't hesitate. I called our lawyer. It went to voicemail. "Thomas?" I said, my voice steady. "It's Helen. I need to revise my will, urgently. Call me in the morning." I ended the call and stood by the window. Outside, the rose bushes George had planted years ago were bare. Not dead, just stripped down, waiting for the season to turn. They hadn't bloomed since he got sick. Not from neglect, from grief, maybe. Or maybe from knowing when something is finished. I went back to the kitchen, rinsed my glass, and set it upside down in the rack. No more wine. I didn't need courage anymore. I needed resolve. That night I slept without the television on, without noise, without distraction. The silence didn't comfort me, but it didn't scare me either. It felt like the pause before something final. And when morning came, with its pale light and quiet certainty, I knew. The papers in that folder would not survive the day unchanged. By noon, I would sit across from the man who knew every detail of our lives, and I would ask him to erase my children from it. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and fresh coffee. I noticed things like that more now, small details, because big ones had already broken me. Thomas stood when I entered. He'd known George for nearly 20 years. Golf buddies, paperwork partners, quiet conversations that didn't need much explaining. "Helen," he said gently, "I'm so sorry." I nodded, but didn't sit right away. "I need to change my will," I said. The words landed heavier than I expected. Even Thomas paused. He removed his glasses slowly. "Of course, but are you sure you don't want to wait a little? Grief can—" "I'm not confused." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "I'm finally clear." I sat then. Thomas folded his hands. "What would you like to change?" I stared at the framed certificates on the wall. Degrees, achievements, proof that people dedicate their lives to preparing for moments like this, moments no one ever thinks will arrive. "I want Daniel removed as a beneficiary." Thomas blinked once. "And Melissa," I added. Silence. Not awkward silence. Respectful silence. "Completely?" he asked. "Yes." He exhaled slowly. "Helen, may I ask why?" I thought of the empty pews, of George's casket sitting alone, of balloons, music, laughter, elsewhere. "They didn't come," I said. "They didn't even call." Thomas nodded once. He didn't argue. He didn't lecture. He didn't try to be wise. He simply opened the folder. "Who would you like to designate instead?" That question lingered in the room like a held breath, and for the first time since George died, I smiled. "Someone who showed up." Thomas waited. "Claire," I said. He raised his eyebrows slightly. "Your neighbor?" "Yes."
Claire. She was 38, a single mother, worked nights at the hospital, lived next door for the past 7 years. She was the one who brought soup when George started chemo, the one who shoveled our driveway without being asked, the one who sat beside him when I couldn't stop crying long enough to be useful. She held his hand, I said quietly, at the end. Thomas nodded again, slower this time. I'll need to document your intent clearly. These changes may be contested. I know. That's why I wanted airtight. We spent 2 hours rewriting what had taken George and me a lifetime to build. The cabin, transferred. The accounts, reassigned. The house, to be sold, proceeds placed in a trust for Claire's son's education. By the time I signed the final page, my hand didn't shake. I felt lighter. Not happy, but lighter. When I stepped outside, the sun felt warmer than it had in weeks. I sat in my car for a moment, breathing, grounding myself. Then my phone buzzed. Daniel. I stared at the screen. I didn't answer. Another buzz.
Melissa. Then a text. Mom, we heard about Dad's service. Why didn't you tell us you were planning something so formal? I laughed. Out loud. In my car. They'd heard about it. Not felt it. Not missed it. Not mourned it. I typed back slowly. I did tell you. You chose not to come. 3 dots appeared immediately. Then disappeared. Then another message. We had things planned. You know how life is. Yes, I knew exactly how life was. And that's when I realized something else. They weren't calling because they missed him. They were calling because someone else had. I drove home without replying. Claire's car was in her driveway. Her porch light was on. I hesitated, then walked over. She opened the door, surprised. Helen, is everything okay? I nodded. Can I come in for a minute? She stepped aside. Her son waved from the couch. Hi, Miss Helen. I smiled. Hi, sweetheart. Claire poured tea, chamomile. She remembered I liked that. We sat at the table quietly. I changed my will today, I said. She froze. Helen? I'm not asking you for anything, I said gently. I just needed you to know you mattered to George. You mattered to me. Her eyes filled instantly. I just did what anyone would, she whispered. No, I said softly. You did what my children didn't. She covered her mouth. I don't know what to say. Then don't, I replied. Just keep being who you are. That night, I slept in my own bed for the first time since George passed. The clock ticked beside me, still loud, still stubborn, still working. And for the first time, so was I. 2 days later, Daniel and Melissa arrived at my door, together. Not to apologize, but to demand answers. They came together. That alone told me everything. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway first. Melissa's SUV followed seconds later, parking too close, like she was afraid someone might steal something that didn't belong to her anymore. I watched from the living room window. No flowers. No apology rehearsed in their posture. No hesitation. Just purpose. Daniel knocked. Not gently. Not like a son visiting his grieving mother, but like a man knocking on a door he believed he still owned. I didn't rush to answer. I folded the throw blanket, set my tea down, straightened the picture frame of George on the mantel. Then I opened the door. "Mom," Daniel said immediately, forcing a smile. "We need to talk." Melissa stepped in behind him without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes scanned the room, walls, furniture, the piano George never quite learned to play. Like she was counting. "Sit," I said, pointing to the couch. They exchanged a look. The kind siblings share when they think they're still on the same team. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mom, come on, you're emotional. Dad just died." I buried him alone. That stopped him. Just for a moment. Melissa recovered first. "We had reasons." "You had priorities." She rolled her eyes. "And now you're giving everything to a stranger?" "Her name is Claire."
Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's manipulating you." I smiled. Not kindly. "Claire held your father's hand while he was dying." Melissa snapped. "That doesn't entitle her to anything." "No," I agreed, "but neither does blood." Daniel stood. "This isn't what Dad would have wanted." I stood too. "He wanted respect," I said. "He wanted presence. He wanted his children to show up." Melissa's voice sharpened. "So you're just cutting us out?" "You cut yourselves out," I replied. "I just stopped pretending otherwise." Her eyes flashed. "You're being cruel." I stepped closer. "I spent 30 years being convenient. I paid bills you never thanked me for, watched grandchildren so you could breathe, canceled my own life so yours could stay comfortable." Daniel looked away. "I asked for nothing, not even when your father was dying." Melissa laughed bitterly. "So what? One mistake and we're erased?" "One absence," I said quietly, "at the only moment that mattered." Daniel swallowed. "You'll regret this." I shook my head. "I already regret waiting this long." They left angry. Not heartbroken. Angry. Their footsteps were heavy, their car doors slammed. I closed the door gently behind them. Then I sat down. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from release. That night, I received 3 voicemails: guilt, anger, threats of lawyers. I deleted them all. I slept deeply. And for the first time in decades, I woke up without dread. What I didn't know then was that my daughter would take this one step further and try to turn the family against me. It didn't happen all at once. That's how these things go. First, the phone stopped ringing. Then the messages changed, not from my children, but from everyone else. "Helen, are you okay?" "I heard something strange. Call me when you have a moment." By the 3rd call, I knew. Melissa had started talking. She didn't say I was cruel. That would have sounded honest. She said I was confused. "Grief does things to people," she told them. "She's not thinking clearly."
she's being taken advantage of. I heard it from Claire first. She came over one afternoon, her face pale, hands twisting together like she was afraid to touch anything. "I don't want to upset you," she said carefully, "but Melissa spoke to the school office. She implied I might be influencing you." I felt something twist inside me. Not anger, disgust. "She questioned your character," I said. Claire nodded. "And your mental state." I laughed softly. Of course she did. That evening, I went to the grocery store. 3 aisles in, I felt it. The looks, the pauses, the whispers that stopped just a second too late. Helen Holloway. Poor thing. Lost her husband, lost her grip. I stood at the produce section longer than necessary, choosing apples George would have approved of, firm, unbruised. At the register, Marlene from church avoided my eyes. That hurt more than I expected. But I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend myself. Because something had shifted. I didn't need approval anymore. The next morning, a letter arrived. From Melissa. Not handwritten. Typed. Formal. "Mom, people are worried about you. If you don't reconsider your decisions, we may need to step in." Step in. As if I were a misfiled document. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer with the others. Then I made tea. And I waited. 2 days later, the knock came. Not from family. From the social worker. She was young, kind, nervous. "Mrs. Holloway," she said gently, "we received a concern about your well-being." I smiled. "Would you like some tea?" She hesitated, then nodded. We sat at the table. I answered every question calmly. Yes, I eat regularly. Yes, I manage my finances. Yes, I changed my will intentionally. No, I'm not being coerced. I showed her paperwork, medical records, legal confirmations, a home cleaner than most. She relaxed visibly. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "Sometimes families confuse control with care." I walked her to the door. When she left, I didn't cry. I stood taller, because now I knew. Melissa wasn't worried about me. She was worried about losing control. That afternoon, Claire's son came over after school. "Miss Helen," he said shyly, "Mom says thank you for being brave." I knelt to his level. Sometimes bravery is just telling the truth and letting it stand. That night, I wrote something down. Not for court, for myself. You are not unstable. You are not cruel. You are finally honest. And that honesty frightened people who benefited from my silence. But the biggest shock didn't come from my daughter. It came from my son, and the thing he admitted when he finally broke. Daniel didn't come in angry this time. That's how I knew something was different. It was early evening when his car pulled up alone. No Melissa, no rehearsed unity, just him, sitting in the steering wheel longer than necessary, staring at the steering wheel like it might give him instructions. I opened the door before he knocked. He looked older. Not in years, in weight. "Mom," he said, quietly. I stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table where George used to read the paper every morning, folding it carefully like he respected the world enough not to crumple it. Daniel didn't look up. "I didn't come to argue," he said. "Then don't," I replied. Silence stretched. Then his shoulders slumped. "I didn't come to Dad's funeral because I couldn't." I waited. "I couldn't watch him be gone," he continued. "I told myself there'd be another moment, another goodbye." "There wasn't," I said softly. "I know." His voice cracked. "I was scared," he whispered, "and I chose myself." There it was. Not excuses, not deflection, truth. "I told Melissa not to come either," he added. My chest tightened. "She wanted to," he said. "She cried that morning, but I said, if I don't go, she shouldn't either. I said it would be easier." "For who?" I asked. "For me." He rubbed his face with both hands. "I convinced myself Dad wouldn't notice." I closed my eyes. George had noticed everything. "I didn't think you'd change the will," Daniel said. I thought you'd forgive us, like always." That sentence hurt more than the rest. Because it was true. I had forgiven everything, for decades. "Why now?" I asked. He looked up finally. "Because I'm afraid," he said. "Not of losing money, of losing you." My heart softened, just slightly. "I already lost your father," I said. "I won't lose myself, too." He nodded slowly. "I don't expect you to undo anything," he said. "I just needed you to know I failed him." Tears fell then. Not dramatic. Honest. I passed him a tissue. We sat like that for a long time. When he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "He missed him," he said. "So do I." After he left, I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not from anger, from release. But forgiveness doesn't always mean reversal, and truth doesn't always restore what was broken. Sometimes it simply closes the door properly. A week later, my daughter made one last attempt, this time with a lawyer, and a threat she thought would break me. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, cream-colored envelope, thick paper, the kind meant to intimidate before it's even opened. Melissa's lawyer. I didn't feel panic. I felt tired. The letter questioned my mental clarity, suggested I was being unduly influenced, and demanded an immediate review of my estate decisions. There it was again. The implication that I wasn't capable of deciding my own life. I placed the letter on the counter and made coffee. Then I called Thomas. "I received a challenge," I said. He sighed softly. "I expected this." "I'm not afraid," I replied. "I just don't want noise." "You won't get noise," he said. "You'll get truth." The hearing wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no courtroom theatrics. Just a conference room, a long table, fluorescent lights that showed everything as it was. Melissa arrived with her lawyer. She didn't look at me. Daniel sat on my side. That surprised me. When asked if I understood the changes I'd made, I answered clearly. When asked if anyone pressured me, I said no. When asked why I chose Claire, I spoke slowly. She showed up every time.
Melissa finally looked up. Anger, not sadness. Her lawyer tried to paint me as fragile, but fragility doesn't look like preparation, and grief doesn't erase reason. After an hour, it was over. The challenge dismissed. Outside, Melissa confronted me. "You chose her over us," she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "I chose honesty over entitlement." Daniel stepped between us. That was new. Melissa left without another word. That night, I slept peacefully, because the fight was over, and I had won, not by force, but by standing still. I thought that was the end, until the cabin burned. The call came just after sunrise. I was halfway through my tea when the phone rang, sharp and urgent, the kind of sound that doesn't ask permission to interrupt your life. "Mrs. Holloway," a man said, "this is the county fire department." I already knew. "There's been a fire at your lake cabin." The cabin. George's favorite place in the world. The place where time slowed down enough for him to breathe. "How bad?" I asked. A pause. "I'm afraid it's a total loss." I sat down slowly, my hand gripping the edge of the counter. Total loss. That phrase carries weight. It means nothing left to save. I drove there that morning. The road felt longer than it ever had, every curve echoing with memories. George teaching Daniel to skip stones, Melissa laughing on the dock, the smell of pine and old wood. When I arrived, the cabin was gone. Not damaged, gone. Blackened beams, ash where walls once stood, the dock warped, half burned, like it tried to escape and failed. I stepped closer, the ground crunching under my shoes. This place held our best years, and now it was smoke. The fire chief approached me gently. "Mrs. Holloway, the fire started inside." "Inside?" I nodded. Accidents happen. But something about the way he said it stayed with me. I stood there longer than necessary. Didn't cry, didn't scream, just breathed in what was left. Later that day, Daniel called. "I heard about the cabin," he said quietly. "Everyone has," I replied. A pause. Melissa asked if insurance was up to date. There it was, even now. "Yes," I said, "it was." "Good," he replied. "That's good." After we hung up, I realized something. The cabin was never just a property. It was proof. Proof that once we were whole. And now that proof was gone. That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "Some things burn, so others can start over." I stared at the screen. Deleted it, but the feeling stayed. The fire report arrived a week later, and it said one word that changed everything. Intentional. The fire report came in a plain envelope. No warning, no drama, just facts. I sat at the kitchen table and opened it slowly, as if paper could bruise. Cause of fire. Intentional ignition. Point of origin. Living room. Accelerant detected. I read it twice. Then a third time. Intentional. Someone didn't just let something happen. Someone decided. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't race.
I felt cold. I called the fire department. They confirmed it. An investigation was ongoing. Insurance would cover the loss, but responsibility was another matter. When I hung up, The house felt too quiet. George had loved that cabin because it was simple. No secrets, no locks, no fear. I picked up the phone and called Daniel. He answered on the second ring. "They ruled it intentional," I said. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. That's impossible," he said. "Is it?" I asked. Another pause. "Melissa was there last month. She took some things." "What things?" "Dad's old journals, some paperwork." I closed my eyes. Of course she had. "Did she mention the cabin recently?" I asked. "Yes," he admitted. "She was angry about it, said if she couldn't have it, no one should." I felt something break inside me. Not loud, not clean. A slow fracture. "I need you to be honest," I said. "With me. With yourself." "I didn't do this," he said immediately. "I know." Another pause. "She texted me the night of the fire. Just one line." My chest tightened. "What did it say?" "It's done." I said nothing. I didn't need to.
Two days later, a detective knocked on my door. Polite, careful. He asked about family dynamics, recent disputes, property disagreements. I answered everything truthfully. When he left, I sat alone in the living room, staring at George's photograph. "Did we raise her wrong?" I whispered. The phone rang that evening. Melissa. For the first time in weeks, I answered. "What do you want?" I asked. "I heard you're talking to investigators," she said sharply. "They asked," I replied. "You're trying to ruin me," she snapped. "You ruined yourself," I said quietly. Silence. Then she hung up. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, from clarity. Some choices reveal who we are. Others erase what we pretend to be. When the arrest came, it wasn't the handcuffs that shocked me. It was who showed up to stand beside me. The arrest didn't happen the way you see it on television. No flashing lights outside my window, no shouting, no neighbors gathered with phones raised. It happened quietly. A phone call first, then a knock, then the truth stepping fully into the daylight. The detective asked if I would be willing to give a formal statement. I said yes. Not because I wanted justice to hurt, but because I needed it to be honest. When they took Melissa in for questioning, the news traveled faster than I expected. By afternoon, the same people who once whispered now avoided my eyes. By evening, they looked at me differently. Not with pity, with understanding. Daniel came over that night. He looked like a man who had aged years in a single day.
I didn't think she was capable of this, he said quietly. Neither did I replied. He sat across from me, hands clasped, shoulders heavy. She admitted she went to the cabin angry, he said. She said she just wanted to scare you, make you back down. I closed my eyes. Fire doesn't scare, it destroys. They found the lighter in her car, and the texts. I nodded slowly. The cabin was gone, but the truth had survived. A week later, the story appeared in the local paper. Not sensational, just factual. Family dispute leads to arson investigation. They didn't print my name in bold. They didn't need to. People knew. Letters arrived, some apologetic, some ashamed. Marlene from church brought soup and cried at my door. I should have asked instead of assuming, she said. Yes, I replied gently. You should have. The hardest moment came later. Melissa asked to see me from holding. I thought about it all night. Then I went. She looked smaller behind the glass. Not defeated, just stripped of excuses. She didn't mean for it to go this far, she said. I know. That's why it did. She cried. I didn't. I loved Dad, she whispered.
I believe you, I said. But love isn't what we say when it's convenient. It's what we do when it costs us. I stood to leave. Helen, she said, do you hate me? I paused. No, I said, but I won't lie to protect you anymore. That was the end of the conversation. When I walked out, the air felt lighter. Not because I had won, but because I had stopped carrying what was never mine to hold. Months later, standing where the cabin once stood, I finally understood what George had been trying to teach us all along. I went back to the lake in early autumn, not because I was ready, because I didn't want to keep avoiding it. The air was crisp, the kind that carries honesty in it. Leaves floated quietly on the water, touching the surface and drifting away like thoughts you don't chase anymore. The cabin was gone, but the lake remained. I stood where the front porch used to be, my feet resting on ground that had once known laughter, arguments, forgiveness, and long silences that felt safe. George loved this place because it asked for nothing. You didn't have to explain yourself here. You just existed. I sat on a fallen log and watched the water ripple. I thought about everything that had burned away, not just wood, illusions, entitlement, the belief that love is owed instead of earned. Daniel joined me later that day. We didn't speak at first. We didn't need to. I should have come to the funeral, he said. Yes, I replied. He nodded, accepting it without defense. I visit Melissa sometimes. She's different. So are we, I said. We stood in silence again. Not awkward, honest. Before leaving, I scattered a small tin of ashes George had always asked me to keep here. Thank you, I whispered. Not goodbye. Thank you. That winter, I sold the land. Not in anger, in completion.
The money went exactly where George would have approved. To education, to opportunity, to people who showed up when it mattered. Claire's son sent me a handwritten card. It said, "I want to be brave like you when I grow up." I cried then, because legacy isn't property, it's permission. Permission to live honestly, to stop shrinking, to let consequences be teachers instead of enemies. Sometimes family is who shares your blood. Sometimes it's who shares your burden. George knew that. Now, so do I. And if you're wondering whether I regret my decision, there's one quiet moment that gave me my answer. It happened on an ordinary morning. No music playing, no visitors expected, no weight pressing on my chest the way it used to. I was folding laundry. George's old flannel shirt was in the pile. The blue one with the frayed cuff he refused to throw away because it's still good. I held it for a moment, and then I realized something. I wasn't angry. Not at Melissa, not at Daniel, not even at myself. The house was quiet, but not empty. The clock still ticked in the hallway, steady, faithful, working. I made tea and sat by the window, watching a young couple walk past with a stroller, life moving forward without asking permission. And I felt peace. Not the loud kind, the earned kind, the kind that arrives when you stop explaining your pain to people who benefit from misunderstanding it. I thought about the funeral, about standing alone in that chapel, about how abandoned I felt in that moment. And then I understood. I wasn't alone. I was just early. Early to truth, early to boundaries, early to choosing presence over promise. Daniel calls me now. Not often, but honestly. We speak about weather, about work, sometimes about his father. No expectations, just connection. Melissa writes letters. I read them. I don't always reply. Healing doesn't mean access. It means clarity. Claire and her son visit on Sundays. We cook together, laugh, sit in silence when we need to. She never asks for anything. That's why she receives everything that matters. Sometimes I sit on the porch at sunset and think about George, not with sorrow, with gratitude. He taught me something without ever saying it out loud. Love doesn't disappear when people fail you. It simply asks you to choose where it lives next. If you are listening to this and carrying guilt for choosing yourself, put it down. If you've been told you're cruel for setting boundaries, you're not. And if you ever stood alone at a goodbye you thought others would share, know this. Standing alone doesn't mean you were unloved. Sometimes it means you were the only one brave enough to stay. Thank you for listening to my story. This was Helen, and these were my truths. Some stories are loud, others are lived quietly. Here, we honor the ones that changed us. If this story stayed with you, don't let it end here. Subscribe to Helen's Stories for more lived experiences, and let me know in the comments what part spoke to you most.